Sandhan. All Gujarat Integrated Classroom.
સેટેલાઇટના માધ્યમથી જોડતી કડી એટલે સંધાન.
Welcome to the viewers. The topic, Romeo and Juliet as a tragedy. Romeo and Juliet is unlike other or later Shakespearean tragedies in that it does not conform to Aristotle's model. In his Poetics, Aristotle asserts that the tragic hero is a man of high estate in whose character lurks one fatal flaw. It is in Hamlet that a tragic hero explains what hamartia is. To his friend Horatio, Hamlet explains that there are certain men whose fortunes are endangered by a single failing of character. I quote, "So oft it chances in particular men that for some vicious mole of nature in them, as in their birth, wherein they are not guilty, since nature cannot choose his origin, by the overgrowth of some complexion, oft breaking down the pales and forts of reason, or by some habit that too much overleavens the form of plausive manners, that these men, carrying, I say, the stamp of one defect, being nature's livery or fortune's star, their virtues else be they as pure as grace, and as infinite as man may undergo, shall in the general censure take corruption from that particular fault." Unquote. In Aristotelian tragedies, the fate of the hero grows directly out of his character. In Hamlet, Hamlet's fall is a deserved and just result of his tendency to procrastinate. In his essay of 1949, Donald A. Stauffer takes a look at, in single quote, this line of thinking that, once again into quotes, the cause of tragedy lie in the sufferer themselves, unquote, and the critic sees that it does not apply to Romeo or Juliet, and both. He observes that in Romeo and Juliet, the hero and the heroine do not receive their just deserts. In this tragedy, their deaths are by no means the logical consequences of character failings, but result from an unrelated twist of fate. One can see in Act 5, Scene 2. Shakespeare's Romeo and Juliet is set in Verona. At the start, there is already in existence a feud between the Montagues, that is Romeo's family, and the Capulets, that is Juliet's family. Because of its Italian setting, it is probably easy to imagine that this rivalry is between two powerfully grounded families, that each has a vendetta against other. Between these Veronese families, there is an, single quote, ancient grudge, of which the historic cause is never disclosed. For the purpose of the tragedy, it is sufficient simply that this conflict should resurface in a new mutiny in single quote. That fate, F capital, in the form of this grudge should complicate a romance between two children from the opposing families. Consequently, Romeo Montague and Juliet Capulet make, into quotes, a pair of star-crossed lovers. Quotes over. According to the star image, their unnecessary suicide pact is an astrological accident waiting to happen. In his prologue, Shakespeare's Chorus tells us that this play will be the tragedy of, into quotes, their death-marked love. Quotes over. The story outline. The play takes place in Verona, Italy, in the late 15th century. At the opening of the play, Romeo, son of the house of Montague, believes he is desperately in love with Rosaline, a young beauty who spurns his attentions. To rid him of his infatuation, his friend, Romeo's friend, Benvolio, suggests he turn to other women. Romeo learns through an announcement carried by an illiterate servant of the house of Capulet, a family engaged in a feud with the Montague, remember, that a ball will be given that night by the Capulets, at which Rosaline will be a guest. Romeo, hoping to see her, and Benvolio, hoping Romeo will find another, decide to attend the ball, even though they haven't been invited. At the ball, Romeo, who wears a mask, sees and falls deeply in love with Juliet, who he later discovers is the daughter of the Capulets. Tybalt, Juliet's hot-tempered cousin, recognizes Romeo but is deterred from doing any harm by the elder Capulet, who will not have his party ruined by a fight. Nevertheless, Tybalt bides his time and vows revenge. Later that night, while Juliet's parents are arranging her marriage to the aristocratic Count Paris, a love-struck Romeo steals into the Capulet's garden, hoping to glimpse Juliet. He overhears Juliet's secret declaration of love for him and makes himself known to her. He overhears Juliet's secret declaration of love for him and makes himself known to her. Now, this is very important. They exchange pledges of love and determine to marry secretly the next day. With the help of Friar Lawrence, a holy man who hopes to heal the breach between the Capulets and Montagues, and Juliet's vulgar but well-meaning nurse, who wants nothing more than to see Juliet married, the two are wedded in the friar's cell, unknown to the parents of either house. Soon after his marriage, Romeo discovers his friends Benvolio and Mercutio in a fight with Tybalt, who has been looking for Romeo to call him to account for his intrusion on the Capulet ball. Because he has married Juliet and looks upon Tybalt as a relative, Romeo resists his advances. Mercutio, angered by Tybalt insults and attacks on Romeo, draws his sword. In an attempt to prevent the fight, Romeo holds Mercutio back as Tybalt draws his sword and slays Mercutio. Romeo has no choice but to avenge the death of his friend. They fight, and Tybalt is slain. Romeo flees to Friar Lawrence's cell. Romeo's fate is sealed when the Prince of Verona banishes him from the city for his deed. The despairing Romeo spends the first and final night with Juliet before he flees to Mantua at dawn. Not knowing that Juliet grieves for Romeo and assuming her tears are for her slain cousin Tybalt, the elder Capulet prepares for Juliet to marry the country Paris later the same week. Juliet pleads with her parents to postpone the wedding, and when they refuse, seeks the friar's advice. He tells her to agree to the marriage, but to take a sleeping potion made from herbs he has gathered. The potion will mimic the appearance of death, and she can be brought to the Capulet burial vault, while the friar has Romeo brought back from Mantua. She takes the potion and is found apparently dead. The morning of her planned wedding, she is buried into quotes in the same tomb as Tybalt. Fate and accident prevent Friar Lawrence's letter from reaching Romeo, who hears of Juliet's death from his servant. Romeo decides to kill himself and seeks poison from an apothecary. He slips back into Verona, finds Paris mourning Juliet at the tomb, kills him, enters the tomb, and finding the dead Juliet, takes the poison. The friar arrives just as Juliet awakens, but he is unable to persuade her to leave Romeo. And after the friar leaves, Juliet takes her own life with Romeo's dagger. The Capulets and the elder Montague, whose wife has died that night of a broken heart over Romeo's banishment, arrive at the tomb to discover the entire younger generation dead. They agree to end their feud. This is what is the story of the play. The date of composition for Romeo and Juliet is considered to be 1597. Celebrated critic on Shakespeare, Malone, has dated the play as first produced between 22nd July 1596 and 17th March 1597. Romeo and Juliet has references to certain historical events. The most discussed has been the earthquake which was felt strongly in England on 6 April 1580. The character of nurse in Act 1, Scene 3, lines 24 to 36 recalls the event. The earthquake had occurred 11 years earlier on the day Juliet was weaned, just before her 3rd birthday. The other possible reference to history has been noted by Mercutio in Act 1, Scene 4, lines 82 to 88, who describes the soldier's dream of, into quotes, cutting foreign throats, of breeches, ambuscados, Spanish blades, of hell's 5-fathom deep, unquote. According to R.W. Babcock, Shakespeare is probably glancing at the Cadiz expedition of June 1596. Now, literary influences. Among literary influences to Romeo and Juliet, two works have frequently been cited as having influenced the play. One is Samuel Daniel's Complaint of Rosamond, written in 1592, and John Eliot's Orthoepia Gallica, written in 1593. More recently, J.J.M. Tobin has suggested Shakespeare's use of a third work, that is, Thomas Nash's Have With You to Saffron Walden. Shakespeare's fascination with Nash's rich, innovative, and free-wheeling vocabulary is well attested and is evidenced in Romeo and Juliet. It may be argued that Nash and not Shakespeare is the borrower, but a fair analysis of the evidence makes this view highly unlikely. The story represented by Romeo and Juliet seems to have its roots in folklore and mythology. Best described as a separate romance, the play shows obvious analogies with the stories of Hero and Leander, Pyramus and Thisbe, Tristan and Isolde, and with later medieval works like Floris and Benchfleur and Chaucer's Troilus and Cressida. However, Shakespeare's primary source of the play has been Arthur Brooke's long poem, The Tragical History of Romeus and Juliet, in 3020 lines, written in 1562. Moreover, something is also borrowed from the French version of the story by Pierre Boistiev, published in 1559, and Luigi da Porto's Giulietta or Giulietta e Romeo in 1530. In Romeo and Juliet, the outer world of the feud impinges on the inner world of Romeo and Juliet. This may be seen as Shakespeare's mode of distinguishing and distracting the public from the private voice. The characters here speaking less as individuals and more as spokesmen for the contending parties and the arbitration of law, a role from which the prince never escapes. With the exit of the prince in Act 1, Scene 1, the tone changes and we begin to hear the voice of personal involvement and concern in Romeo's parents and his friend Benvolio, as ironically they worry over the problem of Romeo's apparently anti-social behavior. At this point, the play moves on to a different level, one that sounds the note of personal emotion and establishes the emergence of individual character, catching readers into the smaller and the private, interrelated but carefully distinguished set up the larger dimension of the play, in which the concerns of the individual lives of love and hate, joy and grief will be played out against the muted but inescapable demands of convention and society. I quote, "Here is much to do with hate, but more with love." Quotes over. The time in the play. The play brings us a consideration of the larger implication of Shakespeare's use of time in the play. Shakespeare, setting the season around the middle of July, 2 weeks before Llamas died, Act 1, Scene 3, line 15-16, packs the dramatic action into 4 days and nights, Sunday through Wednesday, ending early on the morning of the 5th day, that is Thursday. Day 1 is Sunday. Act 1, Scene 1 begins. The day ends with Act 2, Scene 2. Day 2 is Monday. It begins with Act 2, Scene 3, ends with Act 3, Scene 4. Day 3 is Tuesday. The day begins with Act 3, Scene 5. It ends with Act 4, Scene 3. Day 4 is Wednesday. It begins with Act 4, Scene 4, and the day ends with Act 5, Scene 2. And the last day, that is Day 5, early morning, is the last scene, Act 5, Scene 3. An intense and driving tension is thus set up that results in our heightened understanding of and sympathy for the headlong actions of the lovers. The readers, like Romeo and Juliet, are swept along by the apparently overwhelming rush and pressure of events, even though some of those events are, in fact, not beyond the lover's rational control. Shakespeare achieves part of this effect not by ignoring actual time but by stressing it. Shakespeare can also, when he wishes, concentrate and speed the action by annihilating time in favor of what Granville Barker calls tempo. For instance, in Act 4, Scene 2, though Juliet has only just returned from her morning shift at Friar Lawrence's cell, we are told a few lines later by Lady Capulet that it is now near night, into quotes. So late, in fact, that they cannot be prepared for the wedding feast now suddenly arranged for the next day. The time is compressed, stressed. Coleridge praises Shakespeare for opening the play with a Romeo who is already love bewildered. The playwright introduces to a Romeo who is undergoing all the delicious pangs and enjoyed agonies of a young man fashionable in love, or as Coleridge puts it, into quotes, in love with his own idea, quotes over. To present this kind of bloodless figment of the mind, Shakespeare turns to the conventional language of earlier country love as it had developed in the sonnet tradition from Petrarch and other conventional practitioners to Wyatt, Surrey, Watson, Sidney, and Spenser. This language is compounded of hyperbole, more or less witty conceits, wordplay, oxymorons, and endless repetition, usually focused on the versifier's unrequited love, real or imagined, of course, for a disdainful or otherwise unattainable mistress. Romeo, for example, in Act 1, Scene 1, lamenting about the cruel day and longing lights and darkness, says, into quotes, here is much to do with hate, but more with love. Why then, O brawling love, O loving hate, O anything of nothing first create, O heavy lightness, serious vanity, misshapen chaos of well-seeming forms, feather of lead, bright smoke, cold fire, sick health, still waking sleep, that is not what it is, unquote. Lines 166 to 172. As Mercutio later says in Act 2, Scene 4, Romeo is, into quotes, for the numbers that Petrarch flowed in, quotes over. Shakespeare employs Romeo's role as the lover in love with love. and after he meets Juliet, he loses his heart in real love. Shakespeare is using Romeo's verbal acrobatics to foreshadow one of the central themes of the play, the ambiguous and frighteningly fragile nature of love itself. Into quotes, a choking gall and a preserving sweet. Line 185, quotes over. The tragic pattern. Is Romeo and Juliet a tragedy of fate or a tragedy of character? Or is it both? Does Shakespeare succeed in creating a paradox that has long been felt to lie at the heart of great tragedy? The mysterious interaction and fusion of fate and free will? Known critic on Shakespeare, H.B. Charlton, finds the play a failed tragedy, or which, so far as it succeeds at all, does so by a trick, into quotes. The critic considers the feud as a bribe used by Shakespeare, into quotes, to exonerate himself from all complicity in their murder, disowning responsibility and throw it on destiny, fate. The feud being the means by which fate acts. Quotes over. Neither feud nor fate is strongly enough handled by Shakespeare to carry the way of the tragedy. Shakespeare's achievement in this play seems to be, into quotes, due to the magic of his poetic genius, quotes over, and to the intermittent force of his dramatic power than to his grasp of the foundations of tragedy. On the other hand, Bertrand Evans treats the play as a pure tragedy of fate, F capital, in which not only every action of Romeo and Juliet themselves, but every action of all the other characters is dictated by, into quotes, star-crossed lovers, and once again, into quotes, death-marked love, quotes over. Franklin M. Dickey and W. H. Auden find Romeo and Juliet basically as free agents who, in pursuing their love blindly and recklessly, become moral example of excessive passion as they die, into quotes, for doting, not for loving, quotes over, and they are condemnedly punished for trespassing beyond the temperate married love sanctioned by church and state. More recently, John Lawlor has examined Romeo and Juliet in the light of the medieval conception of tragedy. Choosing to die for their love, Romeo and Juliet may be seen as shaking off the yoke of inauspicious stars in an assertion of personal will and sealing a triumphant and dateless bargain of eternity. Another critic, Paul Segal, sees the love of Romeo and Juliet serves divine providence as a part of the cosmic love through which the universe is nurtured by God, and their death converts the evil and hate of the world into the social harmony of love in the death of the feud. Whereas T.J. Cribb suggests to see the play as a dramatic expression of the Neoplatonic concept of love as it was interpreted by Ficino, Pico della Mirandola and Leone Ebrio. A revaluation in which passional love, into quotes, love of another, not for another, quotes over, is the key element. He seems to believe that the sense of, in single quote, awe and amazement in Romeo's sun and angel images in his opening soliloquy in Act 2, Scene 2, are intelligible only in the context of Neoplatonic thought. he also sees that the death of love achieved through a victory over hate. Let's see in detail how fate works in the play. In the tragedy of Romeo and Juliet, we can see the powerful play of fate throughout the play. In this tragedy by Shakespeare, fate is anything that connects to the meeting, falling in love, and dying of Romeo and Juliet. Fate, as we know it in this story, can basically means that readers already have a foreshadowing of certain bad things to happen to Romeo and Juliet from the very start of their story. In the beginning of the tragedy, we can see fate in the scene of the ball where Romeo first sees Juliet. One example of fate is when Romeo first sees Juliet. He instantly wants to meet her. In the scene, Romeo forgets all about his former lover, Rosaline, when he spots Juliet. This causes Romeo to ask a Capulet servant for her name. Another example of fate in the beginning section of the story is the way in Romeo approaches Juliet. Romeo confidently meets Juliet and within minutes has already kissed her. This meeting of the two caused them to fall in love. The start of the play shows much fate towards Romeo and Juliet's first meeting and of their means of falling in love. In the middle of this tragedy, we can see fate in how Romeo and Juliet fall in love. Romeo had snooped over the Capulet's orchard wall just to see Juliet again and to confess his love to her. When he first arrives, he overhears Juliet confessing her own love for Romeo. She, of course, does not know that Romeo is overhearing her secret confessions. And when she finds out that Romeo is there, she is extremely embarrassed. And when she finds out that Romeo is here, it is very obvious for her to see that she gets embarrassed. Then, when Romeo confesses his intense love towards her, Romeo and Juliet schedule a wedding for the very next day. Later, Juliet sends out nurse to find out if the wedding is on. Romeo tells nurse that it is. That evening, they are married. From these two examples, we can see fate in how Romeo and Juliet fall in love and soon after get married. The end of the tragedy shows the great amount of fate through the two lovers' death. Romeo's death in particular shows a powerful display of fate. Romeo buys poison from an apothecary. When he sees that death has taken Juliet, he consumes the poison, and just before that he notices her wonderful beauty. Juliet's death also shows fate, because when she wakes up from her death-like sleep, she finds her beloved Romeo dead. She then takes his dagger and stabs herself. Fate in the end was destined for Romeo and Juliet's deaths. In Shakespeare's tragedy, Romeo and Juliet, fate plays a clear and deciding role. One can easily see from the beginning that they would meet, fall in love, and die together. Now, language, style, and imagery. Stylistically, Romeo and Juliet comes at a point in Shakespeare's development when he is beginning to break away from the conventional and rhetorically bound use of language and figure, of images, into quotes, used for their own sakes, unquote, and of the overextended conceit, with its, into quotes, vain pleasure taken in painting every detail, quote over, and in discovering fitfully a dramatic language which, though it continues to use the figures, uses them directly and integral, so that language and imagery not only describe character but through organic metaphor become the expression of character itself. Shakespeare's use of imagery in Romeo and Juliet has received considerable attention. Images from nature and animals are among the most frequent, but his use of personification is unusually high. As the character Friar Lawrence in Act 2, Scene 6, lines 9 to 11 warns, I quote, "These violent delights have violent ends, and in their triumph die like fire and powder, which as they kiss consume." Unquote. When Romeo sees Juliet, she appears to him, into quotes, as a rich jewel in an Aethiop's ear, quotes over, a brilliance that, once again into quotes, teaches the torches to burn bright, quotes over. Act 1, Scene 5, lines 43 to 45. It is through this special quality of light and darkness that we know, through Romeo's eyes, experience Juliet. In the garden scene, for Romeo, Juliet becomes the, into quotes, fair sun that in the dark of night makes the pale moon envious. Into quotes, two of the fairest stars in all the heaven, unquotes, caught her eyes, which, once again into quotes, streamed so bright that birds would sing and think it were not night, quotes over. Lines 15 to 22. She is one of those, into quotes, earth treading stars that make dark heaven light, unquote, and a bright angel, into quotes, glorious of this night, quotes over. Finally, it is the invention of day, that is light, with its, into quotes, envious streaks in yonder east, quotes over, that parts the lovers. I quote, Romeo says, "More light and light, more dark and dark our woes." Juliet, "Then window, let day in and let life out." Unquote. Line 36 and 41. Night and darkness, usually associated with evil and death, take on the qualities of light and life, while day, usually identified with light and life, assumes the aspect of darkness and death. The most powerful evocation of death is when Juliet says, I quote, "If he be married, my grave is like to be my wedding bed." Unquote. This is repeated by Juliet in Act 3, Scene 2, lines 136, 137. Into quotes, "I will to my wedding bed, and death, not Romeo, take my maidenhead." Unquote. Lady Capulet echoes the same thing. Once again I quote, "I would the fool were married to her grave." Unquote. Act 3, Scene 5, line 140. Shakespeare used language to tell his story and to develop his characters. After the students are familiar with the story, show them places, we can easily see where Shakespeare used all these beauties of the language. For instance, the pun here in the dialogue between Mercutio and Romeo. Mercutio says, "Nay, gentle Romeo, we must have you dance." Romeo says, "Not I, believe me. You have dancing shoes with nimble soles. I have a soul of lead. So stakes me to the ground, I cannot move." Mercutio says, "You are a lover. Borrow Cupid's wings and soar with them above a common bound." Romeo says, "I am too sore, am pierced with his shaft to soar with his light feathers. And so bound I cannot bound a pitch above all, above dull woe. Under love's heavy burden do I sink." Mercutio says, "And to sink in it, should you burden love? Too great operation for a tender thing." Romeo responds, "Is love a tender thing? It is too rough, too rude, too boisterous, and it pricks like thorn." Mercutio, "If love be rough with you, be rough with love. Prick love for pricking, and you beat love down. Act 1, Scene 4, lines 13 to 28. Similarly, the foreshadowing. O God, I have an ill divining soul. Methinks I see thee. Now thou art so low, as one dead in the bottom of a tomb. Juliet, Act 3, Scene 5, lines 54 to 56. Once again, foreshadowing. Or if you do not, make the bridal bed in that dim monument where Tybalt lies. Juliet says, Act 3, Scene 5, 202 and 203. The use of metaphor in this play. Romeo says, it is the east and Juliet is the sun, two of the fairest stars in all the heaven, having some business, do entreat her eyes to twinkle in their spheres till they return. Act 2, Scene 3. Act 2, Scene 2. Then again, Mercutio also uses metaphor. Alas, poor Romeo, he is already dead, stabbed with a white wench's black eye, run through the ear with a love song, the very pin of his heart cleft with the blind bow boy's butt shaft. This is a very good use of metaphor. Juliet also uses metaphor. Gallop apace, you fiery footed steeds, towards Phoebus' lodging. Such a wagoner to Facton would whip you to the west and bring in cloudy night immediately. Now, the use of naming by Shakespeare. It is but thy name that is my enemy. Thou art thyself, though not a Montague. What is a Montague? It is nor hand, nor foot, nor arm, nor face. Oh, be some other name belonging to a man. What is in a name? That which we call a rose by any other word would smell as sweet. Juliet, Act 2, Scene 2. Now a look at the characters. Shakespeare's imaginative involvement with the minor supporting character is fitful. Even Capulet, Lady Capulet and Benvolio have comparatively larger roles and are little more than conventional sketches of well-meaning. Mercutio's principal dramatic function is as a foil, representing one extreme through his continual witty insistence on the purely physical side of love. Mercutio contrasts and comments on Romeo's equally extreme position as conventional lover in the sonnet tradition and emphasizes Romeo's later, more mature understanding that love is not either body of spirit but a fusion of both. That love is not either body or spirit but a fusion of both. The, into quotes, subtle knot that makes us man, quotes over. Mercutio is the source of much of the wordplay, witty as well as bawdy, with which the comic levels of the play abound. Words are Mercutio's, into quotes, whirlwind passion, quotes over. He is, into quotes, a gentleman that loves to hear himself talk, and will speak more in a minute than he will stand to in a month, quotes over. Nurse, Dr. Johnson catches the nurse in full light. I quote from Johnson. She is one of the characters in which the author delighted. He has, with great ability of distinction, drawn her at once loquacious and secret, obsequious and insolent, trusty and dishonest, quotes over. Shakespeare probably gives the nurse an animal vitality through her continual obsession with sexuality. Juliet's final assessment of the nurse, I quote, ancient damnation, quotes over, implies perhaps a harsher and more general condemnation that her character as a whole warrants. Frere. Critical reaction to Frere Lawrence ranges from the uneasily ambiguous to the downright hostile. The reason for his confused response lie partly in the inherited storyline and partly in Shakespeare's treatment of the character. The playwright is twice seemingly content to make Friar a victim of the plot. First, when, under the pressure of Juliet's impending marriage to Paris, he fails to reveal the prior marriage of Romeo and Juliet and tries to cover up the situation by the questionable subterfuge of the sleeping Persian. And second, when, in the final scene, he turns tail and attempts to run away, abandoning Juliet in her moment of supreme need. Shakespeare thus creates a character in which the friar's moral commentator seems to be at odds with aspects of his character and actions as a man. Now, finally, Romeo and Juliet. The special quality of love that is finally expressed through Romeo and Juliet is Shakespeare's supreme achievement in the play. Juliet gives complete expression to her character as well as her conception of love when she says to Romeo about her love. I quote, but to be frank and give it thee again, and yet I wish but for the thing I have. My bounty is as boundless as the sea, my love as deep. The more I give to thee, the more I have, for both are infinite. Unquote. And Romeo, through the inner security of his love, matures more slowly, captures the same sense of selfless giving when, in a speech strongly marked by tragic foreshadowing, he cries out, I quote, Amen, Amen, but come what sorrow can. It cannot countervail the exchange of joy that one short minute gives me in her sight. Do thou but close our hands with holy words, then love, devouring death, do what he dare. It is enough I may but call her mine. Unquote. In Act 2, Scene 3, lines 91 and 92, Friar Lawrence expresses his hope that, I quote, this alliance may so happily prove to turn your household's rancor to pure love. Unquote. He is speaking of pure love in its social sense, but it is purely an irony that the pure love of Romeo and Juliet, warmly human and alive, only achieves its final public symbolic expression in the cold and lifeless pure gold of a funeral moment. In Act 1, Scene 3, Juliet is introduced as a demure, almost tongue-tied girl of barely 14, properly dutiful in the presence of social authorities as her mother and the nurse. Shakespeare thus emphasizes her extreme youth and her almost cloistered dependence. So too Romeo, whatever his age may be, is represented by Shakespeare as more boyish in his solemn vaporings about unrequited love. Critics have pointed out that Juliet is a strong personality than Romeo, and that wins through to an almost frightened maturity more quickly. We sense this in her poised and playfully serious exchange with Romeo at their first meeting in Act 1, Scene 5. And it is understood and it is underscored that in the famous window scene, Act 2, Scene 2, where she shows herself more thoughtful, prudent, and realistic than Romeo, though no less deeply engaged in sensing tragic threat in such intercourse hidden haste. Quotes over. I quote, although I joy in thee, Juliet says, although I joy in thee, I have no joy of this contract tonight. It is too rash, too unadvised, too sudden, too like the lightning, which does cease to be ere one can say it lightens. Unquote. Romeo's final commitment is achieved only after he believes Juliet is dead. That is in Act 5. And, into quotes, is it even so? Then I defy you, stars. Unquote. The implied commitment of such an action, that is to die for love, disguises nothing more than a selfish and thoughtless reaction without any real consideration for Juliet's feelings or the difficulty of her position. Through this scene, and particularly through this moment, Shakespeare sets up a startling point of contrast with the Romeo. Romeo meets the news with control, quiet resolution, and unhesitating commitment. I quote, "Well, Juliet, I will lie with thee tonight." Unquote. With Juliet dead, as he believes, there is nothing left worth living for, and we can now accept his determination to die for love as a supreme expression for a commitment that, like Juliet's, into quotes, it is as boundless as the sea. Quotes over. Thank you very much.
Sandhan. All Gujarat Integrated Classroom.
સેટેલાઇટના માધ્યમથી જોડતી કડી એટલે સંધાન.